Good morning. Thank you, Brian, and good morning. So how was that first night return to dorm life? Laughter and some groans. Okay. So as the governor talked about last night, the 3 days is about what's our vision of the future for Alaska, most especially what's the role of state government in that future, and having defined that role, given the sobering news that Governor Knapp gave us last night, how are we going to go about paying for the Alaska that we want? So I want to take you through kind of an overview of the design. There's a tremendous amount to accomplish, and we've tried our best to be sure that we get the product that the governor wants from the session, and everyone has ample opportunity to participate. The other thing I would remind everybody about is that, as the governor said last night, and also the lieutenant governor, this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end point. So in many ways, what we're establishing here is, having heard what you've heard last night, kind of what's the baseline point of view of people from all around the state on how we go about this. And then we'll continue that conversation and the journey to get from here to there. Hope this works. Oh, good. So there are three objectives that we're trying to accomplish. The first is to define, given that we're shifting from the government that we want to have to the government that we want to afford, what is the right size of state government going forward? And we're going to ask you to examine in your groups which of the services currently being provided by state government do you deem to be critical, meaning they're essential that they go on regardless of the fiscal environment, of medium need being we need that if we can afford that, and the last are low level of need, meaning that those may be things that we go without until the fiscal climate changes. We're then going to ask you in the groups this morning to give us your assessment as to what how you deem the current level of service to be, which is to say the current level of funding for that effort. Is it not enough, about right, or too much in your view? Now, that's a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time, and there's a lot of familiarity with the services, particularly with the stakeholder groups. You're going to have as resources to that conversation commissioners from the departments that are germane to your groups. So we're hoping that with them as a resource, you can quickly move through it. At the end of that exercise, which is at the end of today, we'll be able to calculate, using Commissioner Hoffbeck and his crew, a number for the right size of government going forward based on the majority view of all of the groups. So at the end of the day, we will have a new calculation of the fiscal gap. And tomorrow's exercise is, how do we go about filling that gap? So you're going to be in groups tomorrow at random, and your assignments are on the sheets in front of you, to determine what's the best way to pay for it. At the end of the day, Commissioner Hoffbeck's going to be going through a fascinating interactive model around a lot of the options that Governor Knapp talked about last night, but also many more that they've prepared for what are the options for financing this gap. And tomorrow, you'll have a revenue resource person in your room that will be able to calculate, when you make a decision that there's a revenue option that you think should be exercised, we'll be able to look at what's the impact of that on the closure of the fiscal gap. And you'll be working that model until you either close the fiscal gap or give up trying. I mean, we just can't get there from here. And any outcome is acceptable. We really want to know your point of view, and it may be that it's a bridge too far at this point in time. We'll see how that goes. The third objective is to recruit as many of you as we can in the process of continuing this conversation throughout Alaska, because this is something, as the Lieutenant Governor and Governor stressed, that we want as many Alaskans as possible to participate in. Okay. So I want to go over some operating definitions. Your facilitators and chairs will be going over this in more detail, but just kind of give you an orientation. For the value of the service to you as a citizen going forward, these are the definitions of critical, medium, and low. These will also be available in your session. And then for the level of service, meaning the level of funding for that function, these are the definitions of not enough, about right, and too much. So those are the operating definitions, and you'll be voting as to which of those options you think are true in your group. So we've got 2 sessions this morning around the value of services. The first group is by stakeholder based on either your participation in the transition conference in November or your expressed interest. And the second group will be randomly selected, because one of the things we're interested in seeing is there a difference between the stakeholder point of view regarding the value of services and that of the public at random. These are the groupings. Those of you that were at the transition conference, remember that there were 17 groups. We considered that to be unwieldy for this exercise. So we've collapsed some of the groups into the 7 that you see here. So as I mentioned earlier, for the right size of government discussion, you're going to be seeing a list of services in the functional areas that your group is working on. Some of you may be very familiar with those services and have no questions. Some of you may want to know what's included in that, where do you do it, has the volume of that increased or decreased, what would happen if we didn't do it anymore. And as a resource to you for that discussion, there will be commissioners in each of your groups to help answer those questions. They'll begin with a brief presentation about what those services include. We decided to take out this calculation of the increments of 10 to 20%. We're simply going to be asking you whether you think the funding is enough, too much, or about right. And that's just in the interest of time to give you more time for your discussions. As I said, this afternoon, we'll have a calculation based on your work today of what that new budget number will be. And there'll also be a long presentation by Commissioner Hoffbeck on the revenue options for you to be thinking about this evening so that you can go to work in the morning. There's also going to be an opportunity this evening for those of you that are so inclined to actually play with the model a little bit on computers that we're going to have here on campus. All right, I think we've covered all of that. And we talked about you'll be participating in 3 groups as formal groups. One is a stakeholder, one is a randomly assigned, and then you'll be participating also in a group on Sunday that'll be randomly assigned on closing the gap. Now, you may have noticed out in the ballroom that we have posted banners for the 7 functional areas. What's going to happen is that all of the work from today is going to be recorded on flip charts, your voting and your judgments. It's going to be brought over here into the Wood Center cafeteria area, and you'll have an opportunity to walk about and examine what the other groups came up with, because you may have interest in areas that you weren't able to participate in your groups. Again, there will be commissioners there as resources to answer any questions, and there'll be an opportunity for you on an ongoing basis wandering around the groups to enter questions or comments on a form that will be provided. And all those comments will be captured and be part of the proceedings of the session. So, any questions before we get rocking and rolling? All right. So next up, I want to introduce Pat Pitney. As you learned last night, for those of you that didn't know, Pat is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. She's also the chair of the Fiscal Stability Task Force of the Cabinet that's been working on the design of this. She has been an absolute joy to work with, despite being a point person and working with the legislature on the budget. So it's with great pleasure I introduce Pat Pitney.